Hello everybody, I am Torit Mahato. Welcome to Art in Purulia. Today I will discuss the various aspects of watercolor painting, all that you will probably need to know to start up. I am sure you will not be left with any excuses after this. Watercolor, though most popular as a low cost and easily available painting medium, it is quite difficult to master. This video is going to be slightly long, so I will cover the topic in two parts, watercolor part 1 and watercolor part 2. In part 1, I'll cover the basic materials you may require to start with, then start off with the basic techniques and cover the washes. Then in part 2, I'll continue with the techniques followed by the basic steps you may follow to do a painting from beginning to end. For doing watercolor painting, the basic materials required are paper, paints, brushes, and a few accessories. Watercolor paints are mainly available in pans or cakes and tubes. The paints in the cakes are hard and can be activated by adding water. They are typically sold as a set in a metal or plastic box. The pans can also be purchased separately to add colors to a set. They are easy to carry and mix, but you cannot produce a lot of color for quick application for a big area, like a wash. Moreover, they are hard on the brushes too. The paints in the tubes are soft and creamy and can be easily mixed. Many artists prefer to have both and generally use pan while working outdoors and tubes in indoors. Both the varieties come in an artist quality and student quality. Artist quality contains more pigment and thus they are more vibrant but are expensive. For beginners, even student quality serves well. But if you can afford, go for the artist quality. There are dye-based liquid colors also available with bright colors, but they have a tendency to fade over time. In the market, you also get a really cheap variety of paint which come in cakes. Please don't go for it. They come for just about 20 or 30 rupees, but it's not even worth that because the pigment content is very low. If you're on a budget, I would recommend a minimum of 8 colors, which in the beginning should be good enough to make any shade. Different manufacturers give different names to the same shade. My recommendation should be ultramarine blue, phthalo blue or Prussian blue, cadmium red or vermilion or scarlet lake, permanent rose or alizarin crimson or quinacridone rose, cadmium yellow or new gambos, lemon yellow or cadmium yellow light, burnt umber or burnt sienna, yellow ochre or raw sienna. Papers. There are actually too many options for watercolor paper. They all work, but of course some are better than others. It all depends on your budget and personal preference. Just make sure you are using actual watercolor paper. The amount of water used in watercolor techniques requires a certain kind of weight and composition of the paper. So regular sketchbook paper won't do. Paper has many variables: weight, grain, individual sheets, boards or pads, content, texture, and color or tone are a few to consider. Weight and fiber content. Basically, the heavier the paper is, the more water it can pick up without warping. Quality watercolor paper should also be composed of cotton. Some less expensive papers have other fibers mixed in. A nice weight for illustration style watercolor is 140 pound or 300 gram per square meter. Texture. The terms hot press, cold press and rough are typically used to describe various types of watercolor papers. Hot press is smooth with little or no texture. Some artists prefer this type because it's great for adding fine details. Others prefer cold press or rough paper because their textures evoke a classic watercolor look that also works beautifully with washes. I really don't have any specific preference for texture. I switch between hot press and cold press depending on the look I want to achieve, my mood and the project I'm working on. Format of paper. Personally, I like using watercolor pads. Spiral pads are great because they allow you to work on multiple projects. So you can pick up on one while taking a break from another. Having a watercolor block, a pad with gummed edges, is also nice because your paper will always be stretched. But in that case, you can only work on one project at a time. My recommendation for paper would be a spiral bound watercolor pad of 140 pound or 300 GSM thickness, cold pressed, which is basically not hot pressed, or too rough, of A4 size. Brushes. Choosing the right set of brushes is also a very personal choice. The type of brush you use will directly affect the appearance of the strokes. Most watercolor round brushes have a pointy tip which lets us achieve different stroke sizes just by altering the amount of pressure and the angle of the brush. This versatility is especially handy for lettering activities. It's always a good idea to include flat brushes also. They are great for filling out large areas without having to thin out paints with excess water, and they also work well for the splatter effect. A minimum set of brushes that you may require are number 4 and number 8 round brush, 1 inch and half an inch flat brush, mop brush of about 1 centimeter dia, and number 1 rigger brush. Synthetics are fine, but go with the most expensive you can afford. Palette. Any plastic palette with large areas for mixing should be good enough, and it should be able to hold enough paints. Other accessories what you will require will be two containers to hold water, one to have the dirty water once you wash the brushes, but one jar should be having clean water which will mix with the paint. Then some tissue papers, an HB pencil, an eraser, and masking tape. Masking fluid is optional. Now I'll discuss the techniques of watercolor painting. This list almost covers all the basic techniques what you may require to carry out a successful watercolor painting, though may not cover some special effects. The list goes as the washes, wet on dry technique, wet on wet, lifting out, masking, and texturing. Before we discuss on the techniques of watercolor painting, one important aspect to note is the transparency of the watercolor paints. This is one of the most important quality of watercolor painting. When working with watercolor, you always need to remember that water equals white. By this I mean a few things. To make a color lighter, you must add more water instead of mixing it with white paint. Mixing watercolor with white paint makes it appear chalky instead of translucent. It makes it opaque. When we paint with watercolor, the white of the paper is our true white or the brightest spots possible. In most cases, if we want an area in a painting to be completely white, we paint around it so that white of the paper shows through. Washes. Basically, process of watercolor is building up a painting or picture through a series of washes or brush strokes of paint diluted with water. It is painted light to dark and transparent to opaque. The more water you add, more transparent the paint becomes. So as you start, the water will be more and less of paint. But as you progress with the painting, the water added will be less and less. A wash can cover the whole of the paper, half of it, perhaps for a sky, or just a small part. It can be roughly defined as color that covers a wider area than an individual brushstroke could. In the later stages of a painting, definition may be added with small brush marks or fine lines. But the washes come first, and because they are central to painting in watercolor, the first skill you must master is that of laying a completely even wash of color. How to mix color for a wash? Washes must be laid quickly to prevent hard edges from forming. You cannot stop to make up more color, so you must ensure that you have enough mixed color. Washes use up a surprising amount of paint. The paint should be added to the water, not vice versa. But don't start with a large amount of water, or you could waste a good deal of paint achieving a strong enough mix. Instead, put a small amount of water into a saucer, palette, or paint box. Pick up some color with a moistened brush and stir it into the water. If it looks too light, add more paint, and if too dark, add more water, repeating the process until you have the depth of color you require. Stir the paint in well with the brush each time so that the particles of pigment are thoroughly dissolved and there are none left on the brush. Otherwise, you will have unsightly streaks of color. Before laying the wash, check the color by painting some on a spare piece of paper and letting it dry. Watercolor becomes much lighter as it dries, and the color may not be what you originally expected. This is an important aspect to keep in mind. The kind of brush you may want to use for laying the wash is a matter of personal preference. Some artists like a large round brush, others prefer a flat one, and some avoid brushes altogether and lay washes with a sponge. Whichever tool you use, the method is same. Unless you are using very heavy paper, it should first be stretched on a board and propped at a slight angle. The brush or sponge is then swept right across the paper from one side to the other. As soon as this first band of color is in place, the brush is recharged and another band laid below, slightly overlapping the first. This process is repeated until the whole area is covered. The tilt of the board encourages the paint to run down the paper so that each new line of color mingles with the one above. Some artists like to dampen the paper with clean water before laying a wash to encourage the colors to blend and to avoid any lines forming between bands. It is worth trying out both methods in order to discover which you prefer. Now I will discuss the various types of wash. Flat wash. Flat washes are exactly what they sound like. An area of color that is flat in tone, very even in color throughout, without streaks, brush marks or variations in value. They are painted by pre-mixing enough color in your palette to cover the area you want to paint. When in doubt, mix more color than you think you need. If you run out of color in the middle of your painting wash, you won't have time to be able to mix a perfectly matching paint color before the first part of the wash starts to dry. When you start the wash, elevate your paper slightly at the top so that as you fill the area, a bead of paint forms at the bottom. Once you start painting, keep the wash going. Do not go back into an area already painted. When the area is all filled in, pick up the bead of paint with a dry brush and let the painting dry in the elevated position. Graduated or graded washes. Skies are darker at the top than the bottom, and a color wash should reflect this. Laying gradated washes, as they are called, is more difficult than laying flat ones. The need to make the colors progressively weaker or stronger can result in a streaky effect if you are not careful. You can work from light to dark, adding more paint for each band, but it is much easier to control the effect if you begin with the full strength color and add more water each time. If you want a wash which is darker at the bottom, simply turn the board upside down and work in the same way. For each new band of color, dip the brush in the water before dipping it into the paint in order to weaken the wash mixture by exactly the same amount each time. For a more obvious gradation, you can dip the brush twice into the water, or even use water alone for the second band, in which case the color from the bottom of the first band will flow into the dampened area, thus creating a paler shadow of itself. Gradated washes must always be done on dry paper. This is important. Otherwise, the different strengths of color will even out. Variegated washes. Washes frequently contain more than one color. For instance, an area of grass in a landscape might vary from blue-green to yellow-green, or the sea could contain distinct color fluctuations. In this case, you need to mix in advance all the colors you require, washing your brush between each new color to keep it pure. Multicolored washes can be controlled quite precisely as long as you test all the colors on spare paper before you start. If you are aiming for a perfect blend of colors with no obvious boundaries, it is best to work on dampened paper. A frequent feature of such washes, however, is that they are not regular and perfect. It all depends on what you want. You can also make exciting random effects by dropping new colors into a still damp wash, a technique known as wet into wet, which is discussed slightly later. Complicated washes. Laying a wash to cover a piece of paper entirely is easy enough once you have got the hang of it. But how do you lay a wash that starts and stops exactly where you want it to? You may, for example, want to lay a wash for a sky, below which is a complex skyline of buildings or trees which must stay clean because it is to be painted in different colors. In fact, this is much easier than it sounds, but it does rely on making a good drawing to establish exactly where to stop the wash. There are two ways of working, and the one you choose depends on whether you like to lay washes on damp or dry paper. If you prefer over damp paper, simply dampen the paper in the area of the wash only, taking a wet brush carefully around your drawn outlines. Lay the wash as usual and it will stop obediently at the dry paper. If you want to lighten the color slightly and ensure a smooth and even texture, then dab it with blotting paper, which will absorb some of the excess paint. The other method is to work upside down, taking the color around the edges first. If you want a wash which is darker at the top, leave the board to dry upside down and at an angle. The color will flow down, that is up in terms of your picture. So till now we have seen the various watercolor materials and wash techniques. Continue watching part 2 for the rest of the techniques.